And good morning, Steve. Thank you once again for bringing that hymn. And we're going to continue our study in John's Gospel, of which you guys are certainly aware. We are definitely towards the end of the Gospel and the post-resurrection accounts. This morning, um, we're calling it 8 days later. Where we left it last time was in verse 25 of chapter 20, and it's resurrection evening. Jesus enters the room where the disciples have locked themselves in, and that interaction is there. Actually, that is not entirely true. Verse 25 is happening at some point after that Sunday, and it's when John's account that not Nicodemus, Didymus or Thomas was not present at the first gathering of the disciples, and there's a little editorial comment placed in there by John the writer, and now this picks up, verse 26 picks up the 8 days later, kind of a rerun of what happened a week earlier on Resurrection Night. So let's pick that up 8 days later. And I'm calling it a second time. 8 days later, Jesus's disciples were again inside. Thomas was with them this time. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, same sequence as before. Jesus entered the room, stood in their midst, and said, "Peace be to you." A repeat of the visit prior. So let's take a look at this. We're just going to look at the one verse. So 8 days have passed. You're fully aware of that. Um, there has been revelation, no doubt. Jesus has appeared as a living being post death, and that is revelation. That is something new that is intended by God to be communicated to the human beings. That is revelation. There's been acknowledgement of that revelation. In verse 20 of chapter 20, it says the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. But in deep contrast, fear continues its grip. That is the context of what we're seeing as uh, recorded by the Apostle John. I think John, this is my opinion, John is reminding his audience, that's us, of what I'm calling the holding power of the human narrative. The holding power of the human narrative, the story that I tend to create between my two ears through what I'm observing, the human narrative, and the holding power of that narrative in light of the evidence that Jesus is present. It's still not getting through. And it's not because the disciples are dull, or unintelligent. It's because of the power of the human narrative. And I think this, in my opinion, this is the very thing that Jesus has come to set us free from. Remember, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Information, there's a statement, information is important, no doubt. We need information. But information alone is not enough to move us beyond our own self-created story. There's a lot going on in our beings that keep us held to the stories that we have created, even in light of evidence. as we're seeing in the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. Here's the text 20:26b, really a repeat of 8 days earlier. One of the striking features of the resurrection accounts, post-resurrection, or actually resurrection accounts, is how often Jesus simply appears. I'm making a point here that I'll build to, which will be the slide descriptive at the top. We're going to build to that. John gives the account post-resurrection that Jesus appears to Mary in the garden. That's okay, that's obvious, but it's leading to a point. Jesus comes to the disciples in the locked room. That was 8 days prior. John records that. He is now present at this time that we're studying in verse 26. Jesus comes once again into a locked premise, or not a premise, a location. Sorry, messed up that word. He arrives again 8 days later, and he will come again. We haven't read this yet. He will come to the disciples by the Sea of Galilee. Here are just some descriptors of Jesus entering into the presence of the people. The story we observe is not about, here's my point. The story we observe is not about people finding Jesus, although I'm not, I'm not objection to that terminology, but it's not about us finding Jesus. It's about Jesus repeatedly finding people. And if we could just sit on that idea for a moment, that is the nature of our living God. God is the one who keeps seeking regardless. And I believe the incarnation is the description of how God is in the flesh, of how God is, and also in the flesh. And that description is very clear that it's God who keeps seeking people like us. Jesus' first words are once again, as you already know, peace be with you. So let's just think about this phrase, peace be with you. All the things that Jesus could say in a substantial, from a substantive basis, is that first of all, these people need correction. So Jesus does not state correction. He doesn't state his disappointment. What is it with you guys? Why are you so dull? Why don't you get it? I remember years ago reading the Gospels on my own study. I was trying to decipher when the switch turned on, basically. When was it? Because it was very apparent through the reading of all four Gospels that resurrection morning was not when the light switched on, as far as from the people around. When was it? And so my conclusion was the switch flipped on, it changed the people at Pentecost. That's when we see a different Peter. I was unaware of that until that time. The way we cast resurrection morning is is almost like we enter in subjective, which I think we should, subjectively to the idea of the light switching on. I think in reality, it's a reminder that the light has switched on. God has objectively done something um, phenomenal, but we as people take a while for the light to switch on. These accounts right in here are a demonstration of that. And during that time, we look at the patience of God as demonstrated through Jesus. And because we have the same questions, why is it taking these guys so long? Jesus could have entered under that frame of reference, but he doesn't. And there is no correction, there's no disappointment, there's no judgment. Thomas is in the background, he's not getting scolded. But what we do see is peace. We see the risen Christ coming into the presence of the fearful disciples, and 2 times he says, "Peace be with you." I think that is really significant. Now I'm referencing Thomas because next week we're going to move right into Thomas because that's in the text to follow. Thomas is present, but before Thomas receives any evidence of what he's asking, he's invited to receive peace along with the other disciples. Before Jesus addresses his doubt, he proclaims what is true. Here's my point. He goes in proclaiming what is actually true rather than putting people on their heels of you ought to be like this. Transformation in the human being does not begin with changing ourselves or realizing we're wrong. Rather, it begins with awakening to what is already true. As a human being, I can't face what I'm not. I've got to have hope. I've got to have that switch turn on, and that switch is a new clarity into what is already true. That's my statement, and it's my belief, and it's how I perceive transformation in our lives to take place. Transformation doesn't happen when I'm scolded or when I feel guilty. It just doesn't happen. But transformation can happen if I'm awakened to something bigger and more hopeful. And in my opinion, that's what the gospel message is to be about. Nothing on their now, fellas, some of you were here last week, some of you were not, and I'm using the analogy. This is gonna raise up the analogy of the dashboard. We're sitting in our vehicle and we're driving down the highway, and we have in front of us a dashboard. The dashboard represents or is indicating what is out there. It's through various components, but it's not reality itself. That is really understood. I know the dashboard's not reality itself, but the human nature is that we tend to collapse these two together, where we confuse the dashboard with reality. And so I think it's a powerful analogy to help us understand ourselves and what is true of us. And I'm going to be using that occasionally, the dashboard. So here we're going to resurrect the dashboard again. So nothing on their dashboard has changed. Nothing in reality has changed. And the indicators on their dashboard are accurate. And what those indicators are is Rome still rules. The religious leaders still threaten. and tomorrow is uncertain. That's all true. Nothing has changed in 1 week. And the dashboard is indicating that. But within this frame, if we just look at the dashboard under the frame that we would normally use, our minds naturally build stories from what we see on the dashboard. And thus, what happens is fear becomes the narrator. Fear comes in. Thus, in the story, 2 times, even after the disciples see the resurrected Christ and they rejoice, they comprehend what has occurred, fear is still the narrator. Thus, they lock the doors. It's a graphic example of the human nature of how we as people tend to lock ourselves into rooms to isolate ourselves because of the stories we have created. The reality is Jesus is resurrected. That's what's true. And that changes everything. But the disciples don't, the switch has not clicked on yet because they are holding themselves captive to the very narrative that they are creating in their heads. That's the point. You're going to hear that a lot. They look at the dashboard and they say, this plus this plus this equals this. They're creating that. It's not, yes, the dashboard is indicating certain things, but that doesn't mean I need to extrapolate that conclusion. And here is a great example of how we as human beings do that. When we allow fear, I could use the term, when I give fear permission, I'm allowing fear, giving fear permission to tell the story, to take over, then peace feels irresponsible. I have faced this numerous times in my own life. Me and those around me, is that you don't understand. My situation's different. You don't understand. Well, that is a self-imposed narrative blocking any kind of future progression, because that narrative says, you don't understand. My situation is different. And it's just simply not true. It's just simply a lie that we create. Like the disciples, we tend to mistake our interpretation of the dashboard, just like I said. Okay, this plus this plus this equals this. Well, where do I get the equal? Yeah, the dashboard is giving the right indications, but it's me who's creating the equal sign. And it may not be true. And oftentimes it's not. Where I mistake, I confuse, I collapse the dashboard with reality itself. And that is, in my opinion, one example of how we can think about the human condition. Peace, and thus, here's the final line: peace becomes something we resist. Remember, Jesus is coming in with that first phrase, peace be with you. Yes, it's a polite greeting, but it's a greeting with tremendous meaning and weight. Peace is the reality. Peace becomes, but if I'm allowing fear to create my story, I can't allow myself into the realm of peace. I will resist it. I will say something like, you just don't understand my situation. We often assume the sequence should go like this. This is the contrast. Help me understand. That in itself is really a two-edged sword. I've heard that. I've done that. Help me understand. I think that could be a great response, but it can also be a guarded response. If I don't really want to understand, I just want to stay where I am. So I need to understand first is the sequence where I work out of. If I understand it, I will then believe. And if I then believe, I can have peace. That is the human story right there. I understand, I will then believe, and then I can have peace. That is not the story. That is not what Jesus is demonstrating. Jesus actually reverses that order. Peace comes in paramount. He first establishes peace 2 times. We really need to think about that. 2 times in 8 days, peace be with you. Only then will he invite Thomas towards understanding. If I am operating out of a framework of peace, I can then enter into the hard realities of the truth. But until then, I can't, because I've got to find a basis. And Jesus established that basis is peace. Peace because of who he is and what he's done. Here, transformation begins not by addressing the immediate concern. We got to take care of this. That's what I would do. Guys, we got to have a talk here. You are not measuring up to what you need to be. That just doesn't go anywhere. But by embracing what is actually true. Let me read those two. Here, transformation begins not by addressing the immediate concern. That's what I would tend to do, but rather transformation occurs by first embracing what is actually true. And in my opinion, that's why Jesus enters the room 2 times in 8 days and says, "Peace be with you." Peace is the soil where change can take root. Here's another analogy or metaphor. Peace is the beginning point, and it's where good things can develop from. And so peace comes before anything else, as we see demonstrated through Christ. So, how do we learn to live from a different story? This is really the road that we're all on of transformation. And what has been cited this morning is where we all live. And sometimes we do better, and sometimes we don't do so well. The resurrection, here's fact, the resurrection has already happened. That is true. And so that is true objectively. Whether the disciples or anyone else believes what has occurred, the resurrection, it has occurred. That is objective truth. And because of that, their life has changed. They just don't realize it yet. Everything has changed. But subjectively, the disciples are still learning to live inside that new reality. And this is where we live, fellas. From my perspective, something objectively occurred at the cross. God has acted through the cross, and that is objective truth. The Gospels were written based on that objective truth, and they called it good news. But as we see recorded within the Gospels, and as we have experienced in everyday life 2,000 years later, the objective and the subjective are not necessarily in line. The subjective is constantly moving towards the objective reality. That's our pilgrimage of transformation. The subjectively, disciples are still learning. They're in process, just like we are, and learning how to live inside that new reality that has occurred through Christ. And as I've already said, the same is true for us. That is a good depiction of our journey, our pilgrimage. Faith is not an attempt. So as we look at faith, faith is not an attempt to put positive spin on the gauges. This is where some of our belief systems go south, that we tend to think, oh, just think positive. Make the gauge say something else. No, the gauge is accurate, and we need to embrace the gauge, but we can be a little more cautious of drawing conclusions from what those gauges are telling us and realize they're just gauges. They're not reality. That's where uh, that's where we could all use some really some thought. Rather, faith is embracing what the gauges are already indicating, but within the frame of what is actually true, the resurrection. That is what is actually true. And I sometimes forget that. That's why Jesus can enter the room twice in 8 days with the phrase, peace be with you. Peace is the basis from which we interpret everything else. Peace is reality. Peace in the objective sense is true. That is, in my opinion, that is objectively true. We are not uh, we have no need to be in a state of fear in regard to our relationship with God. God is with us. God is for us. God has beat death for us. We are participating within that. And from my understanding and perspective and belief, that is true. That is objectively true, regardless of the degree that I can embrace that. Now, we all, because we're human beings, we move in and out of that. But I would suggest that next time we move into that realm of fear and doubt, we take maybe go for a short walk, maybe a long walk, and we take and meditate on the cross. Just meditate on the cross of what God has revealed in Christ for us and as us, as we have been studying in this the study of John. The cross is a great place to go when we doubt, because in the cross is God revealed of who God really is. And it lands on a 4-letter word, love, God's love for humanity. And the cross is a great place to go. Here's a review. Transformation does not begin with a new explanation of reality. In other words, we don't need to put spin on the gauges. That's fairy tale. Transformation begins with receiving the reality that Christ has already established. It's already done. But it's really difficult for us at times to believe that. And the reason is because of what's going on in my head between my two ears. We're not being asked to just believe that circumstances are good. I mean, this is a review. Yeah, we're not asking you to tweak the gauges. On the contrary, rather, we are invited to begin every life occasion, that means every day and moments within that day, with what is already true in Christ. And here it is. Here's the statement. Christ is present. Death has been overcome. And his first word is still peace. Boy, that's our takeaway from this section in John's gospel. His first word is always peace. From this foundation, we can honestly face everything else without being ruled by fear. In no way does that mean we don't have difficulty or suffering. We do. It's part of living. But we don't have to live in a self-created narrative of fear, because ultimately, um, because ultimately, Christ Christ has conquered, has walked through all of that for us and as us. We don't need to be ruled by fear. So I spent some time thinking about a question this morning, and I just decided I'm going to refrain from a question. We have talked a lot about the idea of peace being something that is true and real and that should govern our lives. We see it demonstrated through the incarnation twice in 8 days. I think we'd all love to hear what your thoughts are in regard to this, what we talked about this morning.
As you were presenting today, Mike, uh, my thoughts began to go back to a journey that I did with my brother about 13 years ago. He had been diagnosed with ALS, which is a death sentence when you hear it. And I determined that he lived in Sisters, Oregon at the time, and I determined that I would go out at least once a month, sometimes every 2 weeks, at least once a month, just to be with him,
Yeah, that's good.
spend 3 or 4 days with him. And when I started to go out, every time I went out, he was in one state of certainly not being in peace. It was either anger, it was just
Yeah.
doubt. Everything was overwhelming him. He had been a pastor. He
Right.
was a pastor. And it was hard to sit there and watch your brother who is
Yeah.
was a brother to go through that. And so then I'll never forget the morning I went out. I went out probably my fourth or fifth trip that I'd gone out, and I noticed something had remarkably changed. And so I think the first morning I was there in our conversation, I finally broke in. I said, "Hey, bro," I said, "something's changed. you're different than what you've been as you've been in this journey. And I said, what changed? And he said, he said, I came to realize um, that, or to remember that Christ told us that our days are numbered. God has told us our days are numbered. And I came to realize that there's not one thing I can do to add another day to my life than what he's planned for me, nor will he ever take a day away from my life for what he's planned for me. And he said, I'm going to live into that reality, to that truth. And from then on, the rest of his journey, it took him about, I think he lasted about 18 months to maybe 2 years. He was always very peaceful. It was just amazing to see that trans transformation um, in him, and it was that he just came to realize that what God had told him is true,
Right.
and he just started living into that truth. Yeah.
That's a great story, Bob, for all of us because we're all headed there. We're all headed there. And we can talk about death from an academic side of things, but we're all going to enter into that. And what your brother went through is normal. There's something had to switch and he embraced it. I would say your brother's example is really quite normal. What would you say?
Yeah. How often have how often have we gotten um, word from our doctor, oh, this test is not looking right. We're going to do, you need to do something. And then
Right,
your mind just starts spinning.
right. Yeah.
And,
We all know that.
yeah, we all go through that.
Yeah.
And it's just that God is always running ahead of us and working out what's going to be good for us.
Right.
It's much better than what we can plan. And that's what my brother came to realize.
Yeah.
I'm just going to live into the truth of his word. The morning it'll be 13 years ago on Christmas Eve, this coming Christmas Eve.
Oh, wow.
And we knew that that would be his last day. Um, he had called me. He'd wanted to have one last conversation with me. So by that time, ALS had pretty much paralyzed his ability to speak, but I was able to really make out what he wanted to say to me at the end. And so that was like a Sunday night, as I remember, and then the next day was Christmas Eve. He had a very good friend there and sisters, and the way he spent his very last time with, and he asked for this, is to have Dick, his good friend, come over and just sit by him as he was passing away and read John 14.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just
That's a
read
good
it
one.
over and over. He asked for that. He said, just keep reading that into my ear. And that's the way he departed.
Hmm.
Very peaceful, listening to God's truth. I go to prepare a place for you.
Hmm. Boy, Bob, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that story. That is really, really good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
When you talked about using the analogy of the dashboard, you know, and the disciples having their own reality in their mind between their ears, which kind of fought against the reality of outside their mind, and they had to decide which one to follow. Um, it reminded me, embarrassingly enough, it reminded me I was self-employed for a long time. I had a business in town, and part of what I had to do was program my database. So I taught myself, through manuals and books and such, how to program. And you got into all of these Boolean equations and if this, then that, else this, and
Yeah.
your program fields. And it was quite delightful because anything that you fabricated, if the zip code is from North Dakota, then the shipping is $6. And
Yeah.
you just did it.
Yeah.
And the software just kicked out what you put in. And it worked. And I did that, day in and day out, and it became the way my brain thought. It was like, well, just do this and that, and else this will happen or that. And I was just,
Right.
until you got to, by his stripes you are healed. You're seated in the heavenlies with Christ. You're the righteousness of God in him. And you've got all of these commandments that you're programming in, and it's like, why am I not kicking out the right answer? I'm still fighting this thing. It's like, well, why it should work? I mean, why do I feel sick? It
Right.
says right here, the program says that by his stripes you're healed. It's axiomatic, you're healed. Yeah, I'm still coughing up blood though. I mean, this, and there's just so many components involved in this fallen world that we reside in and the spiritual battle that we're facing, whether we see it or not, that to just say, well, Jesus got up, get on, life, live victoriously. Your life is good now. Say, well, I got a lot of stuff I'm dragging around. I mean, how long shall I be tied to this dead body? Here's the Apostle Paul. It's like, I got this cadaver attached to me. I mean, what do I do with him? It's very complicated. And I think it requires a divine intervention. I don't, for my life, I don't think it's a function of my own hands where I train myself to be more Christ-like. And I just practice it. And then next thing you know, Vince is sitting next to the
Yeah.
throne.
Well,
It takes a Pentecost kind of experience. It takes an interaction of God. Holy Spirit fell upon them and like tongues of fire. It's like, and then these people were different. It's like, what the heck? I was scared to death yesterday. I was hiding yesterday. I was afraid to associate myself with this guy yesterday. I told the maid, I don't even know him. I'm not, don't confuse me with him.
right.
And then the next day he's getting up and say, you man of God, you crucified him.
Yeah. Okay.
It wasn't because he studied that night,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's just as you're saying, Mike, the transformation is coming from above, anatheme. It's unless it's from above, it's not going to happen. And God, thankfully, in his mercy, has changed us. And we have to kind of like let go. It's not what we're putting on, it's like what we're leaving alone and letting God do it. So but it's quite an adventure. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
imagine Bob's brother with ALS or any major hindrance to your normal life. It's not a small thing,
Mm-mm.
and at some point you have to, as he did, surrender to the reality of lead every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. I trust God. I'm in his hands. He's not a fool. I'm going to go with him.
That's perfect, Vince. That's a perfect
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah. I think all of our thought as we look at these texts is that these guys are not stupid. It's not about ignorance. It's not about uh, they're not doing anything wrong. It's the process we're all in. My takeaway is we got to extend grace and we got to give ourselves grace because it's a process we all go through. These guys are not abnormal. We're just like them.
Um, I want to share an experience of when I was skiing and I was still not uh, a believer. Okay. So when you go to Steamboat, you actually go through two passes, Cameron Pass and Rabbit Ears Pass. Okay. So one time when I went through, I think I've told you this before about being stuck on Cameron Pass with my little Honda Civic and I could not see. So I just pulled over the side of to the middle of the road, put my blinkers on, and I was rescued by two uh, guys that came in two big SUVs. Okay, so my only relief then was that actually I got rescued by them. Okay, when second time when I actually got through the pass, and then I came to Rabbit Ears Pass and it was stuck solid. There was cars there actually waiting, you know, for it to clear or whatever to get over Rabbit Ears Pass. And I just sat there and I actually experienced God in the sense of the wind was blowing, the snow was blowing, and I just sat there and I was just experiencing the the power of God in terms of the uh, the wind and snow and it was just an experience I had where I experienced God and got somewhat of a peace from that. So it was actually a
Yeah,
step in my journey, when being a late believer. I
yeah,
don't know if that
a
makes
great
sense.
story. Thank
Yeah.
thank you, Tatsi. Yeah, it's a great story. Yeah. And Carl, thanks for joining us, by the way. Yeah.
You bet. Sorry I'm late.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. We're just wrapping up
Yeah.
listening to comments from the guys.
Uh-huh. Just,
The discussion here, the thoughts um, put together with the lesson makes me think here. We'll the dashboard um, is something that I think we approach this and we work on it, so to speak, even though it's a gift. Um, but it makes me think of the verse that, God is going to be faithful to complete the work that he's begun in our lives.
Yeah.
And really getting beyond seeing, through a glass dimly is going to take moving over to being face to face with him, with the reality. We get close with this, and there is an achievement of peace, I believe, at times, as has been shared, like by Bob with his brother. But really, we're not going to complete this. Keep working toward it, but it's going to be God's move to make this fully where the dashboard and reality are one.
That statement, a lot of my life, Steve, has been try harder, just keep trying harder. It's not a correct view of the Christian life, but and I can't say I was actually, well, probably taught aspects of it, but it's how I demonstrated much of and how I perceived much of discipleship is trying harder. But those words that you gave us, Steve, are so true. I mean, they're so true. It's not us. It is God working in us and through us and those around us. And if we can just if we could just let go of that, embrace that, let go of the need to self-create, that's where the problem is, our difficulty, and it's going to happen. And I think that should really lead us to humility. Yeah. Yes, Carl, you're raising your hand. You're so kind, raising your hand.
That's that's really interesting because last night I went back and I listened again to the little presentation by Alistair Begg on the third man on the cross.
Oh yeah.
And as he started that little presentation, I just listened to the middle snippet there of that message, and he was talking about when we have a tendency to think we need to work on our salvation, and we start looking at ourselves and we see that, well, Jesus saved us, but I need to do this and I need to do that, and pretty soon it turns into salvation by works and not by His grace.
Yeah,
And he said we need to daily give the message to ourselves, tell ourselves that we're dependent upon Christ alone for our salvation, and it's not by the things that we do. He says if you do that, you're going to get right back in the rut of salvation by your works.
Yeah.
And he says it's so important. I can, preach that message to yourself. Christ alone, the work that He did on the cross, it's already been done. So it was really a good little review.
Yeah.
I sent it to a friend of mine that
Good reminder.
Yeah. Just,
thanks, Carl.
yeah.
You guys, I like this whole conversation this morning because I've thought back on my life and what I've done to make me believe, and it's nothing. It's all through my whole life. It's been Christ doing all of the work, and He's drawn me to Him. And every time I think I've run off the rails, it's Christ that's brought me back, and it's just, I guess you can call it chasing me down. And it's happened my whole life. Whenever I've had doubts, it's been Christ and Christ alone. So I like this conversation from everybody this morning, realizing that all we have to do is rest in Christ, what Christ has done for us, and that's where I've been living my life. Is nothing I've done, not a single thing I've done. It's all been Christ.
I really appreciate that little phrase you turned, Dean. Christ chasing me down.
The dashboard.
I haven't heard that I've heard that in other contexts, but I've never heard it like that. And we could put that right on the slide. That is that is what we see in Jesus's post-resurrection appearances. God chasing them down. And that is the heart of God. That is so good, Dean. That's great for all of us.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you. Well, fellas, we'll go ahead and sign off. And next week we'll be together. Today is the 26th. We're going to be in will be in September next week. So we'll continue on. And next week, I am fairly certain, is the interaction with Thomas. And I think we'll have some really good interaction about that. So thanks for joining in, fellas. Steve, thanks for bringing the hymn, and it all worked great this morning. And you know, if life is good, why this just not screw it up? Let's just go have.
The thought of the day.
Yeah, the thought of the day. We'll see you guys next week.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
All righty.
Right.